The Obsidian Codex. Interlude. The Children in the Trees. Part 1.
I've slipped away with the excuse of going to the library so that I can record this now before it's too late. It's July 10th, 1990. More than anything, Robert, or whoever listens to this, I hope you will understand why I did what I did, even if you can't forgive me. I knew that some unspeakable horror had drawn near, though I could not explain the peril or how I perceived it. A sense of unease had been building in me for weeks, an existential dread that prized at my mind, slow and unrelenting. It was not political angst. My home in this quiet borough of Mexico City lay at a great distance from the nuclear posturing of Reagan and Gorbachev. It was not a crisis of faith. I had long ago abandoned my parents' religion for the steady agnosticism of the sciences. I had become Dr. Nelson Kerr, reputable archeologist, citizen of 2 countries. Marta, my wife and physician, intuited my struggle. She had an easy explanation. You've just turned 80, my love. Mortality looms large. Then her wistful smile glowed as lovely as it had 4 decades before when we'd first met in the little town of Tepoztlan. So this aging archaeologist had set aside my strange anxiety and tried to be happy once more at her side. But in late May, strange tremors thrummed throughout central Mexico, their epicenter roughly 200 miles off the coast of Michoacan. Something about the news nagged at me and wouldn't let me be. For days I scanned every article in El Universal and hung on each word broadcast by Televisa. Michoacan, tremors, shuddering earth, all the way to Mexico City, to the site of old Tenochtitlan, where Lake Texcoco once spread jade green beneath the sun. When the connection clicked in my mind, I hurried to my study and spun open the safe. Inside sat 2 worn leather journals, packed with dense writing in my careful hand and sketches of my most important finds. I did not need to search to find the relevant section. These were the most read and bookmarked pages in the 2nd volume, transcribed 20 years before, letters shaky with tremulous excitement. Early in my career, I had stumbled across the diary of a Franciscan monk, in which were reproduced images from that pictographic pre-Columbian document burned during the conquest by Jesuit priests terrified at its implications. But though I had made faithful copies of those few illustrations from the Codex, I had never discovered a written record of all the lore it represented. In pre-literate Aztec society, such knowledge was passed mind to mind down the long years. Then, after decades of intermittent and frustrated search, I had finally tracked down, in 1964, a member of the esoteric sect known in Nahuatl, the Aztec tongue, as in Itepixcawa Itzamochtli, the keepers of the Obsidian Codex. The man, one of the last disciples of that millennial cult, had agreed to recite their obscure scriptures, some 10,000 words in classical Nahuatl. The second of these leather volumes contained my transcription of recordings made that day, a secret journal. For the first time in a decade, I pored over the yellow pages, skimming past weird incantations and eldritch hexes, black-hearted hymns and ciphered rites, until I found the passage that chilled my very soul. The rambling verses foretold the awakening of Cihuacoatl, one of the Huehueteeteo, or Great Old Ones, godlike beings from the dawn of time, the females of which were named Tzitzimime by the Aztecs, those who devour stars. Still as death beneath the waters of Great Lake Texcoco, Cihuacoatl has lain dreaming, the text explained, for tens of thousands of years, attended by the Centlanca, or Deep Ones, whom the Aztecs also called Tlacamichin, ageless beings of the oceans who await the awakening of the Huehueteeteo. I turned to my other journal, flipping to the page upon which I had sketched one of the few existing images from the Codex. A massive creature, with skeletal visage, black-plumed wings, and a torso that ends in squirming serpentine tentacles. This was Cihuacoatl, and she had been depicted bursting through the lake, flooding all of Semanawak, the sea-ringed earth, as she sought for her brethren beneath the rising water. Returning to the apocalyptic poem, I read a prophecy. Unrest would arise among the Centlanca that abided in the depths not far from Michoacan, the lands of the Purepecha Empire that had since become the Mexican state of Michoacan. Those gilled and scaly servants of the Great Old Ones would seek to rouse their queen from her tenebrous dreams, shaking the earth so as to reopen antediluvian tunnels that once bored through the foundations of the earth to join lake to sea, now blocked by mankind's insect swarming. If awakened, the Codex warned, Cihuacoatl would stir to life the others, leviathans not mentioned in any other surviving record, queer names that hardly seemed to fit the Aztec tongue: Quetzolo, Aztol, Catanotoa. The final strophe ended with the cryptic line, only in Pilotl Kitlatziwi Tlacatl, someone indifferent to youth, could lull Cihuacoatl back into her unsoundable dreams. I could only guess at the meaning of this obscure phrase. For a time, it seemed I had solved the mystery. Events in the real world had stirred my unconscious mind, dredging up connections to a bizarre quest that had eaten up so much of my early career. In the end, however, I was left with the same sinking realization as 20 years earlier. Even if I broke my old promise to the keepers that I would never reveal their secrets, my transcription of scriptures of an obscure Mesoamerican cult would likely be dismissed as a bizarre fraud by the academic world. My rational mind would, of course, never admit the possibility that the contents of the Obsidian Codex had any relevance beyond the halls of academe. Yet, as a mild summer crept into the Valley of Mexico, bringing slate skies and a seemingly endless cycle of drizzle, rain, and hail, a pall settled upon my heart. It was as if the world had been draped in grave clothes, gray cerements that wound themselves around the vast syncretic metropolis. Every hollow horn of every dingy automobile seemed a plaintive dirge. Pedestrians, their heads down against the rain, struck me as little more than mourners filing away from a massive tomb in silence, or ants scurrying before a swirling storm. Try as I might, I could not rid myself of the despair that grew with each bleak day that passed, filling my mind with skirming blackness. Though I was a principal consultant on the project, my weekly trips to the Templo Mayor, the massive excavation in the former religious quarter of Tenochtitlan, no longer presented wonder and joy to my eyes. Instead, the ruins of the massive pyramid, erected to honor the gods of war and rain, engendered fear, a gnawing at my innards, a tightness in my aging chest. When I stood on the disc at the foot of those ancient steps, its 10-foot diameter displaying the dismembered moon goddess Koyoshawoke in bas relief, I thought on the hundreds of thousands of men and women and children whose broken, bleeding bodies had tumbled from on high to rest on that very spot. I could not even weep for them. Instead, I feared for all the other lives that awaited unwitting their own indifferent shattering. Overwhelmed again and again, I would hobble away from the dig, only to find myself in the Zócalo, surrounded by colonial structures built with the rubble of the razed Aztec capital. Staring unseeingly at the metropolitan cathedral, I thought I sensed the cobblestones vibrating beneath the soles of my shoes. I pictured that ageless and cyclopean bulk buried deep beneath the rock and silt, imagined tentacles curled dormant around the foundations of the Mexican highlands. Shrouded peaks in the distance lost their majesty and permanence, seemed paltry boulders silhouetted against the vast, blank grayness of the sky. Hoping to efface my enervating desolation, I took my wife for a stroll through Chapultepec Park on a Saturday in September, when the clouds parted and the sun promised to melt all gloom to gaiety. But despite the feel of my beloved's hand on my arm, the colossal redwoods and cypress trees loomed like hoodoos, their roosting flocks still and silent as sentinels. The zoo echoed with raucous screeches and moans of animals driven to frenzy by unseen prods, and their keepers considered closing the gates to the public. We climbed the great hill, crowned by its castle, once home to the Colegio Militar and Emperor Maximilian, now housing the Museo Nacional de Historia. As I stood at the foot of the stairs, looking up at the mural of the heroic teens who had died protecting the hill from U.S. forces 138 years before, I buckled for a moment under the weight of all the deaths wrought upon that rocky promontory down the millennia, most vividly those killed there by the mercenary Mexica, or the Mexica that neighboring tribes ambushed and slaughtered in return. Corpse upon corpse, nameless, forgotten, not even sneered at or despised, simply irrelevant to the never-ending turn of the cosmic gears. Small, insignificant, meaningless. Marta drew me away from my dejected ambling, and I realized as we emerged into the aloof sunlight that I had walked the entire museum without truly seeing a single thing. My wife wanted to take a boat ride on the lake. There were threats implicit in the glistening water, but I sighed and agreed. We rented a small bright blue boat, paddled efficiently by a father and son team that took us out into the very center of the Lago Menor. I watched the reflections of nearby skyscrapers twisted in and out of the shadows upon the green surface, while Marta made small talk with the rowers. I saw, in a panic, that something was watching me as well. A pair of black eyes looking up through the water. Heart pounding. I leaned forward, squinting. I made out a form there amidst the waving fronds. A humanoid of mottled ochre flesh, gills gaping at its throat. It bared white predatory teeth at me and jerked away into the depths with a pistoning movement of webbed feet that sent unmistakable bubbles to the surface. Fishman, I thought, gasping and gripping the gunwale. Atla Kamichin, one of the Sintlanka, the deep ones. It was all I could do not to scream.